Hello everybody, my name is Lachara, and this is my overview / guide to the mechanics specialty in Eco. It'll be an overview of the skill and some tips and tricks to help you be a more efficient mechanic. To unlock mechanics, you need 20 of any basic research, which is just wood, stone, easy. You need 5 of any advanced research. You're looking at, mortared stone, hewn logs, again, pretty easy. You also need 10 engineering advanced papers. These are windmills and water wheels, 2 apiece. Obviously, those will be a little harder to find than the other things, but nothing too serious. And then you need 10 metallurgy advanced. This is iron bars and copper bars. Probably the toughest thing here, but there's nothing super ridiculous. It's not something I would advise trying to do on day one, but it is theoretically possible with some coordination, especially the smelted stuff. So let's talk about what crafting tables you're going to need as a mechanic. Now, there are 2 different phases as a mechanic in the game. There's early game when mechanics is new and fresh, and then there's later in the game when industry and electronics are out. I'm going to focus on the early part now, and we'll talk about the later part of the game later in the video. You're going to need a tier 2 or better workshop, which means brick, lumber, or glass, or of course, higher tier material. We got this wall as tier 3, reinforced concrete, because this recording is made later in the game. You're going to need to get a machinist table from a carpenter. Carpenters make these. And at the machinist table, you make your other things, which is a shaper, a screw press, a lathe, and an assembly line. And yes, the assembly line is used. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. I would recommend at least 2 machinist tables. I had 3 for the early game. I'm down to 2 now because we've moved on a bit. A lot of different things get made here. The screw press, I would recommend a lot of these. I had 4. I had 4 of these screw presses because a lot of the important things you need are made here, and they're pretty small, so it's easy to jam extra in, right? They take up barely any space. The lathe and the shaper, I had 1 lathe and 2 shapers. You could probably get away with 1 of each, or you could do 2 of each. It's more of a preference thing there. The assembly line, like I said, it is huge. 6 by 7 and 4 high. So definitely plan for these, especially if you want more than 1. I had 2, and I didn't regret it because there are things that you make here, like the cement kiln. That's 40 minutes to make that. And that's with, modules and talents and all that. And even a blast furnace is 10 minutes. The oil things, I think, are, 8 minutes a pop. Like these don't come out fast. If you only have 1 assembly line, it's going to take you a long time to get this stuff out. So if you are going to have 2, though, you need to plan a really large workshop. Like I planned all this out before I even started building. I knew how many I needed. I knew approximately how many tables I wanted. Just make sure you plan it out. That's the only thing. So what do you make in the early game as a mechanic? One big thing that you're going to want to make right away are screening machines and stamp mills for miners. I would argue probably the most important thing you can make when you first get mechanics are the screening machine and the stamp mill for miners, and the blast furnace for smelters and advanced smelters. Probably don't have any advanced smelters at that point, but you will eventually. And of course, masons are going to want cement kilns. Farmers are going to want steam tractors and the attachments that go on that, the harvester, the plow, the sower. I'm not sure how to say that. Oil drillers, when the time comes, are going to want pump jacks and oil refineries. As you can see, you've got a lot of big ticket items here that people can't do their job if you don't provide them what they need. Mechanics is important. And then, of course, there's your bread and butter, the steam truck. Everybody's going to want a steam truck, right? Just keep in mind, you're going to need several things that you don't make yourself, right? You make these plates, you make the screws, you make the axles, you make the portable steam engines, but iron pipes, you'll need to get from a smelter. Leather hide, you'll need to get from a butcher. Lumber, you'll need to get from a carpenter. Iron wheels, you need to get from a basic engineer. Light bulbs, you'll need to get from a glass worker. And you may have one of these professions already to provide the thing, but if not, just make sure you're in communication with somebody who does these jobs so that you can keep all this stuff in stock. Because, like I said, everybody's going to want a steam truck. Everybody. Most other things that you make, you'll just need iron bars, copper bars, and of course iron pipes. Then there's bricks for the blast furnace. You'll need to keep some in stock. One tip I can give too, make sure you keep copper wire in stock so that glass workers can buy that from you to make light bulbs. Because if you don't make copper wire, there's not going to be any light bulbs, right? So that's the early game mechanics experience. Let's talk about late game now. Once industry and electronics are out, you're still relevant, but what you make will be different than before, obviously. You will need an electric machinist table, which is made by somebody with industry and needs to go in a tier 3 workshop, which of course, or better, which of course is reinforced concrete, which is what I have, or corrugated steel, or like I said, tier 4 materials obviously works. At this point, you will want to keep the following things in stock. You will want to keep copper wire in stock. You're going to sell a lot of copper wire. You're going to want to keep gearboxes and heat sinks in stock. You'll need a lot of those late game. One tip is I would have these stocked up and ready to go before industry and electronics coming out. Because, yeah, all of a sudden, you like early game, you're not going to sell a single heat sink. But late game, there's going to be all kinds of heat sinks going out. Also, pistons are used in a few late game recipes. And screws, which are made over at the lathe here, are used to make composite lumber furniture. You'll probably use your shaper as much in this part of the game, if not more, than you did early because of the aforementioned gearboxes and heat sinks, right? The other ones will be used less. Like you don't need to keep 4 screw presses at this point. Second lathe, I didn't use at all at this point, right? I don't think you need a second lathe. You probably don't need the second assembly line. If you want to take that down and repurpose that space into something, you'd probably be okay. And then at the electric machinist table, wiring. You will want to make a lot of this. It is used for advanced circuits. Combustion engines are used in a few things like chainsaws, for examples, and servos and valves are things that you make that are used in super late game stuff like skid steers, for example. You can also make stoves. It's like the only finished product you make late game is a stove, but hey, advanced cooks will definitely buy stoves from you. For talents, I took parallel processing, and I do recommend parallel processing. As I showed, I have multiples of pretty much every machine. If you want to try to get away with a smaller workshop with just one of each machine and the focus workflow talent, the other talent here, you probably can get away with it. I prefer the larger workshop and multiple machines though, but it depends, how many people are on your server, how many mechanics, how busy you're going to be. Like there was a couple other mechanics on my server, but I was by far the most active, right? So I needed a lot of machines. You may have a different experience. So if you're going to go large workshop, parallel processing. If you want to try a small workshop, focused workflow, I would not recommend the strategy where you take focused workflow and then you put each machine in its own room. There's just too many machines, and some of these machines are way too big for that to be an option, in my opinion. You can try it. If you want to be very ambitious, you can try it. And then, of course, at level 6, I always recommend taking lavish workspace. Just make sure that your room is the appropriate tier, and you'll be good, right? So what professions go well with mechanics? The obvious choice is industry and electronics, which is what I did here. All the rest of the stuff is all industry and electronics stuff, right? These are the only things in this room that are for mechanics. This room obviously is almost entirely mechanics. But anyway, the three of them go together really well. There's so many things that are used, interdependencies back and forth. I would not take any of those 3 talents or skills without taking the other 2, unless, of course, I was playing on a server where, you can't. If you're planning to take something before mechanics, like if you're not taking mechanics with your first skill, smelting is probably the best thing because you need so many iron and copper bars and iron pipes and all that. The other popular choice, which is what I actually did here, is basic engineering. But it has a similar feel to mechanics, right? It's in the same profession as mechanics, but honestly, I think it's overrated as a pair with mechanics. The only thing it makes that mechanics need is iron wheels. That's it. It's an overrated combo. in my opinion. Carpentry can also be good. There are several recipes that need lumber. Like, you'll need more lumber than iron wheels, for example. But smelting's best before, then obviously after. Industry and electronics is the way to go. In conclusion, mechanics is one of the most important skills in all of eco, honestly. A lack of mechanics can cause a server to come to a screeching halt, right? There's so much stuff that you make that people need to do their job well. I do not consider it to be a new player friendly skill. There's a lot going on. I wouldn't recommend taking on your first server. Not saying you can't, but I would take, simpler professions first, in my opinion. Also, if you're the type of player who just wants to log in, do your own thing, not really interact with other people, it's not the skill for you. You spend so much time sourcing materials from other people, taking requests for stuff from other people. If you're kind of just looking to do your own thing, I wouldn't do mechanics. It can be very lucrative. You can get very rich being a mechanic. Just keep in mind, it takes a huge investment of money to get started. You got to build these giant workshop, right? And they're not cheap to make the workshop. And then you need to buy all the materials, right? With some coordination, you could have this unlocked pretty early. You could take it for your first skill. If not, smelting, basic engineering, carpentry first, and then obviously industry and electronics after, in my opinion. What you do make changes over the course of the server. Mechanics does stay relevant, you know, unless you get to the point where, people are only building, right? Even then, you'll still probably sell some mechanic stuff, right? It's a fantastic specialty. This was my first time doing it on the server, and I quite enjoyed it. As long as you like feeling needed, it's great. It can be overwhelming at times. It can be a lot. You're going to be busy and popular, but as long as you're okay with that, check it out. If you have any questions about it, hit me up in the comments or on my Discord. If you want to join my server, also join the Discord. We don't have an active server right now. I will have an active server as soon as update 10 comes out. Will be my 11th multiplayer server. Most importantly, though, be good to each other. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.